What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with Fantasy Alarm, and we are talking DFS bargains for Week 3. We'll start off at quarterback this week. I am ridiculously in on the Vikings-Lions game. It has the highest point total of the entire slate, and if you're like me and want to play stacks within this game, we need some bargains to get up to the talent. And my favorite bargain quarterback of the week is Jared Goff. This Detroit team is just flat out fun, and I would pay good money for Dan Campbell to come and give me an inspirational speech every single week because it is clearly working for Detroit. Minnesota, on the other hand, had a poor showing, but is poised for a bounce-back game, and I expect Goff and the Lions to keep pace and make this a relatively competitive game. If you want to get a little bit different, heading over to Atlanta and playing Marcus Mariota in GPP lineups is a good move. Mariota continues to be a low-priced option with rushing upside. He's typically a safe play, but against Seattle, I think he goes from a safe floor to a high upside option this week. What we're looking for out of him is a game where he sees 50-plus yards on the ground, which is very reasonable for him. And if he can add a couple of touchdowns to that rushing upside against an average Seattle defense that is dealing with key injuries, Mariota can pay off big time. Moving on to running backs, Houston went from a baffling week 1 where they gave the favor to Rex Burkhead and limited Dameon Pierce to only 29% of snaps. And they went from that to giving Pierce the reins with 62% snap count, resulting in 15 carries for 69 yards. We're just looking for a touchdown from him. We're one touchdown away from bargain euphoria with Dameon Pierce. And this week against Chicago, I think it could happen. Pierce is still ceding pass work to Rex Burkhead, but this game against Chicago should be fairly evenly matched to help avoid any game script issues. I love the matchup for Pierce, and the price is excellent. Now, it may seem very strange to have Josh Jacobs as a bargain running back, but hear me out. For perspective, on DraftKings, he is lower priced than Alexander Madison. So yes, this is a bargain for a running back who saw 19 carries last week. Josh Jacobs can be extremely frustrating, but this matchup against Tennessee sets up perfectly for him to have around 20 carries, good yardage, and touchdown opportunity. Tennessee is 26 in DVOA against the run, and they've allowed the third most fantasy points to running backs. This is a good setup for Jacobs. Moving on to wide receivers, Rondale Moore is still not practicing and unlikely to play. So grab your bargain king, Greg Dortch. He just continues to put up numbers. In week 2, Dortch caught all 4 of his targets for 55 yards and 1 touchdown. Even with Zach Ertz returning, Dortch still maintained a solid snap count, and the Rams' defense is actually not a bad matchup. Another solid bargain option is Ashton Dulin. Dulin became a big bargain play when Michael Pittman was out, and he can do that again if Pittman is out. But I think he's still a cheap, viable option even if Pittman returns, because Pittman is still limited in practice. It's very possible that if he plays, the Colts could keep their star on a pitch count, particularly in a game where they straight up are just not going to win. I don't think this will be a very pretty game. Matt Ryan will struggle, but Dulin is solidifying himself as the wide receiver 2 in that offense. Now, this is a contingency plan. This is not a good matchup, but Romeo Doubs is healthy and literally every other Packers receiver is not. Tampa Bay's defense is tough, but with the vast majority of Packers players not practicing on Thursday, Doubs is set up to see an increased snap count and targets. He could pay off at an extremely low price, monitor the reports leading up to the game, and act accordingly. Another contingency plan receiver is Joshua Palmer. If Keenan Allen plays, I'm likely not including Palmer in any of my lineups, but if Allen is out, Palmer is a solid play. Palmer had a 91% snap count with Allen out last week and caught 4 of 8 targets for 30 yards and a touchdown. I'd run it back with Allen out. And you know what? One more contingency plan. Mack Hollins. Yes, Mack Hollins. Hollins played more than 80% of snaps this year so far. And last week, he had 5 receptions on 8 targets for 66 yards. Hunter Renfrow is dealing with a concussion. Hollins can be a very cheap play if Renfrow is out. And at tight end, I am so happy that Irv Smith returned to normal-ish usage last week. You have to remember that Smith didn't play in preseason and hadn't seen live action in a game since 2020. He's being eased back into regular play. Last week, he caught 5 of his 8 targets for 36 yards and a touchdown. We talked about this game earlier between the Vikings and the Lions. Smith is a cheap way to get exposure in what could be an offensive showcase. Thank you for watching this week's DFS Bargains. Be sure to subscribe to Fantasy Alarm and come back next week for another round of DFS Bargains.